to the Source CEO panel. On stage with me today are three distinguished CEOs from the security industry. We're going to hear a lot about what they think, and I'm going to do my best to stay out of the way. So for the most part, I'm going to just try and drive these guys to have some interesting conversation, and we're going to hear what they think. On my right is Patrick Morley. I'm actually going to let you guys introduce yourselves because I don't have my bios. I don't have bios with me. So, Patrick, if you want to tell us a bit about yourself and Bit9.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Patrick Morley, and I'm the CEO of a company called Bit9. And Bit9 is a company in the enterprise application whitelisting space, which, if you think about blacklisting with AV, we're essentially do something slightly different on the whitelisting side, and it's something that appears to be gaining considerable popularity out there, certainly among the customers and prospects that we're talking to. And we're based right in Cambridge, right down the street.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm Josh Pennell. I'm the CEO of IOActive. We're one of the three firms that are hired by Microsoft to do the Win7 Vista Client Vista Server code review. So if you have any problems, just contact me afterwards. I'll see what I can do for you. We're headquartered in Seattle, Washington. We really specialize in high-end application security review, so white box, black box testing.
I'm Matt Moynihan, CEO of Veracode, located in Burlington. And Veracode is an on-demand application security testing company. We do both white box and black box testing, but we have an automated solution as opposed to a manual one.
Very cool. Thank you, guys. So let's just jump right in. You guys, as CEOs, have a lot of contact with the customers, and you probably hear all of the good things and all the bad things that are happening out in the world, at least with the customers that you have. Maybe Matt, you want to start this one off, but what do you find your customers are asking for most? What's their biggest pain?
Well, there's a security pain, and then there's sort of the budget pain that exists. So I think that what we're finding is a combination of both. Interestingly enough, is that automation with accuracy seems to be one of the things that they're asking for, particularly in this environment. And it's interesting because being an on-demand company, in many respects, people will equate Veracode with a sort of, you're Qualys for applications. We love the automation, but how do you solve certain elements of application security that can't be solved by a machine and need a human in the loop? And Veracode's model really does believe that there are things that machines can find and find better than humans, but you also need humans for certain things like business logic issues and applications. So it's really the interface, and particularly in a budgetary environment like this, how do you have a joint solution that leverages all the best of automation so I can get broader code coverage across all of my applications, and then actually bring in the human for what they do best, which is finding certain types of security vulnerabilities, determining exploitability, things of that nature, and all doing it within budget. And so it's an interesting interplay between some of the new technical innovations around automation, but also trying to keep a very important human as part of those application assessments and doing it all within budget.
Very cool. Josh, what about you?
I think what we're seeing out in our neck of the woods is companies are really changed course. Application security is being baked into the development process. I think they are foreseeing that there's going to be a point in time where regulation is going to happen. Companies are going to be asked to provide secure code to their customer base and be accountable for that code. In the budgetary space, we are not seeing a decline. I expected to see some kind of weakening in the demand for our services, in particular, sometime in this quarter, but we've actually seen an increase past what we saw in Q4. So I think that people are smelling blood in the water, and they're kind of shoring up their defenses.
Very cool. Patrick?
My perspective slightly, I guess, adjunct to what you guys are both talking about. And I think our perspectives come from where we sit in security. And I spent 3 hours this morning at a company here in Boston that has about 40,000 employees worldwide. And the biggest theme that I see for particularly large companies right now is they're trying to figure out, how do I put it all together? We are an endpoint protection solution, Bit9. And what we see with IT today is that they are consistently surprised at what is going on amongst their user community today from a vulnerability standpoint. And consistently they're trying to figure out, how do I take all the different security solutions that are out there in the marketplace, and how do I weight what each one's going to provide to me from solving the business problem that I have which ends up being a security problem from their angle, given that they're on the security side. They are surprised at the breadth of the problems that they have, and they're consistently surprised at what it takes to actually solve what would seem to be relatively simple problems today from a security and a vulnerability standpoint.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I'm gonna jump on something you just said right there.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. You talked about security as a business problem, and the three of you obviously are business people first, and security people second. How do you guys see the business landscape affecting security, and especially affecting the way that you guys do business? And Josh, maybe you want to start off.
I guess just giving notes from the field here, the interesting thing that we've seen is, for example, regulations like PCI have really gathered the CFO's attention, the board's attention, and what they need to do in that space to mitigate risk that's been pushed down to them by the acquiring bank. The acquiring bank saying we're not going to cover fraud anymore. It's up to the merchant to cover those fees. And here's a big set of rules that you have to comply to avoid those fines. I actually met the Grim Reaper of PCI. I was sitting across from him at lunch, and I didn't realize who I was talking to until he started talking about the fines that he leveraged against companies and how he was super excited about this fact. One of the cases was an $8 million fine. He called up the client and said, hey, guess what? You lost a bunch of credit card information, and now you owe us $8 million. And they paid, and it's just the way it works. So I think from a business standpoint, one of the drivers, kind of sum it up, is some regulation that is kind of combining the security world with the business world. And that would be PCI.
Yeah, I do think we see, similar to PCI, a movement by CIOs and CISOs to focus on risk coming from third-party sources and looking for some sort of validation at certain levels of security, whether it be testing or assessments, call it what you will, have been done. You see CIOs, CISOs spending most of their day job focusing on reducing risk internally, and you still have a sort of risk equation. The better job you do internally, the more comes externally. And so again, I think that you are seeing, whether it be PCI, the fact that you can't reduce your liability, you can't hold others accountable for security vulnerabilities that are built in over in India or China, procuring third-party software, all of the risk that's coming from third parties, I think, is going to be really a topic that's top of mind over the next 12 to 18 months.
Patrick, since you started this, what do you think?
We see it. We tend to see it from the operational guys. So one of the themes that we're seeing right now is that obviously, as different aspects of security become commoditized, they tend to be run actually by the operational folks as opposed to the security folks. Security folks are actually making the yes/no decision from a technology protection standpoint, but actually who's running it is the operations guys, and they are much more dialed in based on what we're seeing right now from a budget standpoint. They tend to have a lot of power because they're running most of the infrastructure for a lot of these companies. And so I think one of the themes we're going to continue to see is the blending of, and again, this is my perspective coming from an endpoint standpoint, we're going to see the blending of operational pieces and security pieces as IT customers try and actually operationalize, that's not a word, but you get my point. They actually try and operationalize security. And we're already seeing that. You see with Symantec and the decision they made with Altiris, you can start to see vendors are actually making the decisions. They believe that security is going to become part of the operational suite, or vice versa, however you look at the world. And we're certainly seeing that with customers. And a lot of our purchases are done by the operational guys as they're trying to figure out how do I effectively manage what I've got sitting out there, both traditional software on the infrastructure side, but also on the security side.
Matt, you used one of my favorite words there. And the three of you come from very different parts of security. I mean, obviously you have very different perspectives. And we all throw around this word, and I'm going to ask each of you for your definition on this. And start with Patrick, put him on the spot for once. Oh, he's got food in his mouth. Matt, maybe you get to start. That's a good way to get out of being the first one, just so you know. What is risk?
What is risk?
Elliot Spitzer.
Yeah, that's a good point. The probability Yeah, you have classic definitions, right? I mean, the probability of an event happening and the impact of that event or the consequence of the event, you can, define it any way you like. I think the real question is, what is acceptable risk? Things are going to happen. What is the probability that those events are going to happen? And then can you live with the consequence of that happening, right? And I think that, obviously I come from the application security space. Previous to this I was at Symantec, which was an endpoint company. And it all comes down to, really, how much risk do you need to bring out of the system with the budget you have? And what's the most effective spend? So there's no magic behind the term risk. I think it's really around, in some cases, it's, what does it cost to, cover your fanny in certain environments? You don't get fired for hiring Big Blue. And so I think everyone has different definitions, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to, how much money do I have? And with that spend, with that dollar spend, what's the quickest way or most effective way to reducing the attack surface of my organization?
Patrick, you're nodding your head. What do you think?
I think that's exactly what we see, right? Risk is in the eye of the beholder, and each organization has a different view on what risk means to them and to their organization, what they can afford to actually protect, what they believe that they don't have to right now from either a resource standpoint or from a dollar budget standpoint that they can't do right now. I think Matt, his definition is very accurate.
Josh, you have anything to
That
throw
was a
in?
cop-out, but that was a good answer.
I think risk can't be quantified until the event happens. For example, I often wonder what's went through the CEO of TJX's mind when he's reading about his company in a newspaper and losing millions and millions of client records and getting sued by Visa for $85 million. I think he knows what risk is now. I think gliding over and having a checkbox audit for wireless security and having HR systems hooked directly up to your mainframe. I think those would equate to clear risk in his mind. I've also talked to people who have been the folks that were tasked with walking around post-event. Their systems were wormed. The software they wrote was exposed to a wormable surface, and they were given a check to go around and make it all okay for that software company's clients. And I think you could say that's risk, and risk is often equated with clearly numbers. So once an event's happened in a corporate culture, there's a metric that gets assigned to that, and then there's processes and procedures that are wrapped around preventing that from ever happening again. But it's not a proactive thing. It's very reactive. I think that's my point.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to switch gears again. Elliot Spitzer's the big news story of the day, but lost in all of that, the Federal Reserve undertook pretty much heroic measures in the last 24 hours to try and boost up the economy. It's clear that everyone's worried about the economy from the manufacturing sector all the way to security. And this time I am going to put you on the spot because you're not eating this time.
No.
How are the economic worries affecting your customers, your business? What are you seeing out there?
We have not yet seen a huge impact in where we're selling today from the economic issues, other than in certain communities. I think in the financial community right now, we've seen a number of projects get pulled back because of the direct impact of what's going on right now with the crisis on the credit side. I think it's making them really customers focus on priorities. And they were already doing this, but I think it's said, hey, if it's not in the top 3 or 4 or maybe 5, it probably won't happen. I also think it really brings clarity to the answer that Josh gave earlier, which is the two top drivers we see are if someone has had an event, so they understand risk, or someone's coming in from the side and saying from a compliance standpoint or from an audit standpoint, we're going to tell you what risk is and what is too much risk. And if one of those two things are happening in an organization, then they will usually find the budget because it's someone on the business side saying, I don't want my name in the paper, I don't want our company in the paper, or it's somebody saying, no, we have to adhere to a certain regulation. And the number of regulations out there that are driving security is amazing. I mean, amazing the number of acronyms out there right now that people are using when they make a decision to do a purchase.
Josh, you mentioned that you guys are actually seeing an upturn in business. What do you attribute that to? Are you guys just lucky to be in the top 3, or is the economy not really affecting everybody, or what do you think?
was going to ask you that. I think I was talking to a very intelligent lady yesterday over lunch named Becky Bass, and I said, Becky, what's going on? Like, I was expecting to see a downturn, a slowing of some sort, and she's like, Josh, I've been in this business for 35 years. And I'm like, I'm 31, so yeah, she knows what she's talking about. And she said the security market, in her experience, it diverges from the average trend of our macro market. So when our economy downturns, she's seen the security market uptick because people are tightening up the belt and they start to look at things like bottom line issues like fraud, and how do they take the machine that they have right now and tune it so it's even more efficient. On an up economy, people are like, well, I guess we could tune that number, but we're making so much money right now, let's just continue to grow the business and not shore up the internal mechanisms. So that was her take on the situation. I thought was pretty insightful. And like I said, we're not seeing anything right now.
Matt, what about you?
Yeah, we're not seeing too much either, although like Patrick, there's been some dislocation in the financial services industry, not so much because of budgets, but more because of organizational structure and dislocation. It's been so extreme there that, when you have a shifting organizational landscape, it's tough to have continuity to who you're selling to. But Vericode's message does tend to play very well in this type of environment, largely because it's essentially a consolidation play. You're moving from a software tools market where you're spending money on tools to an operational expense model with a service. People like the ability to control that, dial it up and dial it down. A subscription to multiple technologies sort of allows you to get 2 for 1, if you will, and then we're all about automation. And so do more with less tends to resonate. So we've had some, but not as much as we might have thought.
Makes sense. Patrick was mentioning all the acronyms, and I would be remiss talking to 3 CEOs if I didn't ask, and I'm going to put Josh on the spot. What do you see as the difference or the comparison between compliance and security?
In our little world, compliance is really, it can be used in 2 ways. This is where we've seen it applied. It can be used as a reason to go champion a person's security cause, to do security right within the organization. So it's an enabler of security stakeholders. Or if it's not a security stakeholder, compliance ends up being merely a checkbox routine where people show up with little to no technical background and are asked to fill out a form, check the boxes, make it look pretty, and sign it.
Matt, what do you think? What do you see?
Well, I think security is a state relative to, risk, if you will, and compliance is a state relative to a regulation. And so I think what's interesting is that, we have been in some accounts where, they feel like they're compliant because they don't know what's wrong. So there's an interesting interplay with, knowing what's wrong and needing to fix it to be compliant with a regulation versus not knowing and feeling relatively comfortable because you don't know what's wrong. So I think that's an interesting relationship between the two. But I agree with what Josh said.
Patrick?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the sector, and it depends on how, are they a public company, are they a private company, what's going on with them internally. Literally in the last 90 days, we've had customers buy because of SOX, because of HIPAA, because of FDA, because of FDIC, and with the new government mandate, it's actually been talked about for a while, but the FDCC. All of these are mandates. You got to learn all these acronyms. Many, I'm sure you all know all of them, plus more. And it amazes me when you go into different organizations. I think it was one of these guys said, I don't know who it was, but you find people who are championing their cause, their project, and they latch on to a particular acronym because it's got business justification behind it. And normally it's gone through a vetting process and it's valid. But as I said earlier, I think it's a big driver for where we see projects right now. Organizations are very concerned about making sure that they can pass whatever regulation, whatever acronym they're up against.
Makes sense. All right, pull out your crystal balls for a minute. What do you see as the biggest change in the security market over the next 18 months? And Matt, I'm going to throw this one to you first.
18 months. I'll take it out 36 or 48 months to get a little crazy. I think it's, and obviously I'm somewhat some biased here, and it may even go beyond 3 or 4 years, but I do think you'll see an environment where all of us in the room can write code, whether you're a business user or a developer. You have folks like Charles Simonyi, ex-CTO of Microsoft, out there doing some really interesting things. Obviously, we have this whole notion of object-oriented development and reusable code and things of that nature. Web services is essentially that same type of thing, where you're constructing applications and enterprise mashup from third-party sources of information or capabilities that you really don't need a very sophisticated technical background to do. And so I think that the biggest challenge, whether it's actually all of us writing code or web services or SOA, is how do you bring security to a yet again distributed sourcing environment? It's very, very difficult, and getting the same level of trust that's required there to make sure that the security posture matches, whether it's your regulatory environment or whatever it may be, is going to be very, very difficult to do.
Patrick, predicting the future.
Again, it all comes from where we sit. So Matt's coming from an angle, our angle right now. I think the easy answer, the flip answer is we're going to continue to see consolidation in the security on the vendor side as customers demand one stop. We hear that every single customer visit I go on. They're asking what other major vendors, what are the top security vendors doing in the areas that we're in, because customers don't want to deal with all of the different security vendors out there. And so I think one of the big trends will continue to be consolidation. That's an easy answer because we've all seen that go on, and that's only going to continue. And again, from our biased perspective on the endpoint, I think you're going to see consolidation on the endpoint where security becomes a factor of a more proactive operational stance. And all I mean by that is if you think about some of the security issues that we all have out there right now, in effect, on the endpoint, because that's where I sit, my company sits, a lot of what's been set up is to react to something that was done wrong. And so the stronger the operational vendors, the lifecycle vendors, the companies that are patching, deploying, actually managing that endpoint can do and affecting that, it actually reduces some of the requirements on the security side. And so I think you're going to see a trend where, and I mentioned this earlier, continued consolidation between the operational side and the security side, with the view that the more proactive we are, the less reactive we're going to have to be on the security side. The only other point I'll make real quick is that I think you're also going to see some of the larger vendors out there that are already on the endpoint move to the back office, and I think you're going to see the guys on the network side come down, because I think they're recognizing that IT customers want a single shop, and so they're going to try and solve more and more of that from one vendor.
Josh.
Okay, I have a couple points. We're often sought out currently just because we are a very niche player in what we do, so we're beating out larger consolidated companies, but that's on the West Coast, and there's a big difference between the two. I think on the legal front, what I foresee happening in the next 2 to 3 years is that we used to have this concept that you couldn't secure software was impossible. And so it was kind of the status quo in the industry that everybody agreed that spending cycles on trying to secure it was an effort in vain, kind of like New York. It was Gotham City, is ungovernable. But now we've seen Microsoft, Duck, they have actually made really great inroads into securing software. SQL Server has no remote attack vectors. IS6, there's no remote AVs in that. And Vista, has had some pretty good success to date. So I think what the point there being is it's setting a precedence that software can be secured. It's not perfect, of course, but it can be steps in the right direction. So people who are experiencing financial loss due to poorly written software, I think they're going to be pretty surprised in the next few years to be experiencing serious lawsuits. And on the other front, my next point is we're moving into the offensive age. We've been talking about this for years. It's now happening. The government's looking for people to help on the offensive front. I've actually seen clients right now go offensive from a commercial perspective. They're seeking out Pinkerton-like companies that are placed in strategic areas around the world that will actually go out and do a physical arrest of people that are perpetrating fraud within their environments, zip tie them, leave them in the hallway, and call the authorities for pickup. So people are really taking the stuff into their own hands, and we're no longer in the defense game. The game's moving to offense.
Interesting. Okay, one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. If you had one thing you could tell the audience that would be your lasting wisdom for them to take home from this, what would your one line be? We'll start to my right. Patrick, what do you think?
That's a good question. I could give a biased answer about us, but I think you know, what you've heard from all three of us, and I'm sure if you're all in security, you're thinking the same thing. There is no single answer today. I personally think in the security side there continues to be an incredible amount of work that's going on and innovation going on, trying to close down the gaps. And I think what we're going to continue to see in the years ahead as the security industry matures is that, as Josh just said, this offensive idea, the idea of being on the offense, we're going to see that recognized as security becomes more mature. And there is no single answer today, and we all have to really work hard to figure it out, and every organization is different, and the needs are different.
Josh, what do you think?
I'm still thinking, asking.
No, go ahead.
Go for it, Matt. I think you've been passed too.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would agree with what Patrick said. There's no silver bullet, and I would force technology providers, whether they're technology developers or solution providers, to consolidate themselves. You know, I think that something that you know, Veracode started out as a tool, and we explicitly decided not to bring it to market as a tool because it didn't solve the problem, didn't solve the complete problem. So we turned into a service company to solve more of that problem, and our problem that we're trying to solve can't be solved solely by a machine. It needs a human in the loop. So forcing that to happen, forcing companies like Patrick's, Bit9, and Veracode to come together to some extent. You know, so without knowing Bit9 intimately, these application control or endpoint control companies are moving to doing some very innovative things in gray listing. But you think about the market, it went from blacklisting to whitelisting to now the innovation's gray listing. Well, what about things like Google Toolbar that may be allowed into the organization by an IT administrator by bringing extra level control to it? But what happens if there's a backdoor in Google Toolbar? Is that really an application you want internally? Why not scan the code by an organization like a Veracode or others, and then take that metadata and put it into Bit9's capability to allow you to do a more robust decision at the endpoint? And so I think that security is the one area, if you look at something like 800 different security companies, it's one of the areas of most innovation of any. But again, it can't come to market in silos. I think they should force consolidation both at the corporate level, but also in the technical development standpoint.
You're on the spot now. What do you think?
All right. I think what I've seen is, I think privacy on the internet's dead. I was talking to people who write major search engines, and they told me they could tell the difference between an 18-year-old kid clicking on a banner ad versus a 35-year-old man looking for porn. It scared me. So yeah, I think we've lost that battle with all the spyware and adware. So I think moving, you know, when you think about the internet, it's not like, at least what I thought it used to be. So we're being monitored intensively, and we're kind of in the wild, wild west. We're not dealing with defending our networks and our software from disenfranchised MIT kids. We're dealing with, you know, defending our networks against Romanians and Nigerians, et cetera. So I think it's kind of like we established this beachhead out in the cyber world, and all of us kind of enjoyed what we built, and the masses have now caught up. The mob was pleased to report that their second quarter earnings in the online fraud division surpassed those of their organized drug trade department. So the world's changed, and I think that's trust no one, basically, at the end of the day.
Okay, opening it up to all of you. Questions? Let me run out with the mic here. I can do this.
All right, I'm going to use Matt's comments about Bit9 and Veracode working together, and Patrick, your comment about consolidation. And here's the question. Having personally spent the last year at McAfee before going small again, I've seen firsthand both the marketing pitch, if you will, as well as the realities of that consolidation. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of the opportunity of more of I'm going to characterize it as open source. Obviously, it's not because it's individual organizations, but effectively building a best-of-breed ecosystem where you've got companies that are 100% focused on their particular areas, working much more closely together, trying to actually bring to the market best-of-breed capabilities as opposed to what the Symantec's and the McAfee's are stitching together through what I would call a marketecture.
So is your question whether or not that model can actually exist out there in the future?
What your thoughts are in terms of the ability to do something like that, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, you do start, there are certainly projects out there today that have that trajectory. I think, again, what we see is it's easier to innovate in a small company than it is in a big company. Anyone who's been at both sides knows that that's absolutely the way it works. The customer habits are also all built around those big companies. And so the very fabric of the way that we approach solutions in the security side has to get altered in order for our customers to actually want to go out and get these types of solutions that aren't from one of the major vendors. They're already programmed to buy from McAfee or Symantec or Microsoft. That's who they're buying from today, and it takes big movements, big ideas, and solutions that actually fundamentally change the way that these guys think in order to break that. And I think it's really hard to break it. That's kind of a cop-out answer as well, but yeah. Because in the end, most of the guys that are, if you even look at other areas of IT spend where open source or those types of ideas have become much bigger, there's usually a capital side to it that's driving it.
I think it's definitely possible, particularly with the advent of web services. I mean, if you look at ultimately the success of many of these products, it does come down to user experience, right? So if you take on, and be able to, sort of capture the value of combined technologies, particularly in the security space, but underneath a user experience that makes it worth a while. If you look at a lot of the true innovation, BlackBerry, Apple clearly, Norton really in its early days, they own end-to-end everything, right? They own the UI all the way down to the engine, to the content, and it's a tight integration between software and hardware, whatever the product is, that allows you to have a really compelling user experience. If it's a positive user experience, adds value, cost-effective, people buy it. You buy it, drive down pricing. The other end of the spectrum, you have, mashup applications. Multiple vendors, almost an ecosystem, if you will, supplying to a very user-friendly, web interface. People use it. Real estate being an example of that, right? You can get, your average real estate agent constructing some pretty neat applications with, someone part-time helping them do it. In between, you have Symantec and McAfee, right? That are assembling components from companies they've purchased, and it's a product, and they don't own end-to-end, right? And all of a sudden, you have user experience impacted in many respects. Some integrate companies very well, some don't, and it's not just Symantec and McAfee. There's a host of companies, Cisco, who have, made their business on acquiring. It's very difficult to maintain that same user experience in that environment when your business model is M&A. And so I think that there's an element at play here that absolutely I think it's possible to do that. I think it's going to be a question of how much of that innovation comes organically and how much do you rely on third parties to make that happen, because at the end of the day, if it's not user-friendly, I don't think you'll ever have the uptake that will be required to get mass adoption.
Josh, do you want to throw anything in there?
No, I think they covered it.
Question here?
Actually, I wanted you guys to comment on virtualization, if you don't mind. We're seeing a lot of it, and it seems like a very hot topic, but, one of the security principles I remember was the more complex and more software you have, the more problems you're going to have. In this case, I presume, some sort of security vulnerabilities. And here we are, everybody's rushing because hardware has gotten so good to, put 6 operating systems on a server and run 3 million apps. I was just wondering what you guys think of that comment.
I'll jump in there. We have this mantra at IO Active called "What could possibly go wrong?" And virtualization is square in the middle of that bullseye. Virtualization was never built as a security product, but people have kind of picked it up like that, and somehow it's morphed into the security play. I can tell you that the vendors today are investing money in securing that code base, so that's good. And if you look at the Gartner trending reports, virtualization as a security product is up there on the hype cycle. So you'll probably see more and more investments in that area. currently today, virtual switches and all of that. Yeah, it's an area ripe with interesting opportunities.
Given every customer I go to, just about every customer I go to asks that question. So tell me about what your virtualization strategy is. And so from a customer standpoint, if the customers are demanding it and asking for it, and I'm hearing it, that means every other vendor is hearing it as well when they go and meet with customers. And so the market will react to that and work really hard to fix it. Now, obviously the complexities of that environment, just as you said, adds a level of sophistication and work that's going to have to be done in order to solve it, but it will come. And there is a ton of hype around it right now, and some of it very realistic because of what it's doing for companies on the budget side and what it enables them to actually do. So solutions will be there. It's on our roadmap. I'm sure it's on others as well, as far as having a solution that'll work in that environment.
Other questions over here? Hold on. I have to run across the room to do this.
So for years, software companies have had a liability shield from lawsuit, and I think that's helped proliferate a lot of the bad code we've seen out there. Do you feel if the government lifted some of the liability to at least go after companies who are grossly negligent in their development, do you think that'll force the software companies to clean up their act, or do you think that it'll bankrupt the industry?
I think you're going to see it. We're certainly seeing it at Veracode. I think there is a element here of collaboration that's required. I think it's the two things that major enterprises need to do when they're forcing or asking or requiring vendors or ISVs to improve the security posture of their code is apply pressure, because they have it. Outside of the top 10 software companies in the world, the vast majority of software companies are not applying the right level of security testing to their code. And I'll take Bit9 off of this, but I would say some of the greatest transgressors are small security companies. And when you think about it, they oftentimes get the benefit of the doubt that the code is secure, and they're small companies like everyone else who can go afford a six-figure license for one of these source code analyzers, right? And so I think the second thing that needs to go into it is apply pressure to make sure that these folks actually get some validation that the code has been properly tested. And the second thing they have to apply is reason, because there is an economic model for software companies. ISVs have to make money. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for an enterprise or a government agency to say that I am not going to accept code that has a severity 5 or a severity 4 vulnerability in it. It's unreasonable. I think it's unreasonable for the CEO of any software company to say, I should feel comfortable shipping code with a severity 5 or severity 4. It's that middle tier, severity 3s and severity 2s, depending on your taxonomy, that may be debatable around, are these security flaws that are exploitable for certain, or is there some element of discretion around where this application lives and what the operating context is that may have mitigating controls in place to say it's not exploitable? It's unreasonable for an enterprise to force a software company to turn its software development lifecycle upside down to fix those on the spot, but wring them out of the system over time and adopt some sort of best practice that says, for those severity 3s and severity 2s, that may be important, over the course of 12 to 18 months, take them out of your products by implementing better practices in the testing environment for your SDLC. And so I think that absolutely, in some cases, they should be forcing vendors to get better instantaneously by identifying these flaws. Risk control begins with identification, but be reasonable in how far you take that, because you'll break the model of the very companies you're sourcing from if you get too aggressive.
Yeah, and I think the market also is driving it. I think anyone who's done a large contract with 20,000 or 50,000 endpoints, or even smaller, 5,000 endpoints as of late, who signed a contract, those contracts are getting very sophisticated about what they're asking for, even in regards to what that product will do on those desktops. And so, again, as we continue to mature, the industry continues to mature, and the operational guys get more involved in it, they're looking to make sure that they're covered, and they want you to cover it for them.
You are seeing insurance companies get into the fold. There's been a couple recently that have talked about altering their rates depending on the amount of testing or assessments that's been done by third parties. That's been the holy grail in security for the longest time. Can you get Lloyd's of London to stand up and say you're going to get cheaper insurance rates because you've taken some sort of actions, whether it's deploying perimeter defense or getting some sort of manual code review or an automated review, whatever it would be. And you are seeing that recently. So I think that the increase in liability from the TJXs of the world, the shareholder lawsuits, you'll start seeing more of the insurance industry get behind some of the security initiatives that are out there, and not just the government.
I think in 2000, 2001, the federal government talked to Bill Gates and said, hey, it'd be really great if we could have some secure software. And then Bill Gates wrote the Trustworthy Computing Memo of 2001, and the entire company has changed since then. So from that perspective, just a market pressure was enough to do it for, say, Microsoft. So hopefully maybe that will apply to the rest of the world. Although I'm seeing marketing from other like competitors to the operating system that claim that they have a secure operating system, and in reality it's kind of the Oracle play on the security. It's more marketing investment than anything. So until there's actually some kind of regulated something that gets the board's attention, software security will not manifest to the point where it will benefit the masses. It needs to be a board-level issue.
Hi. In his keynote address this morning, Richard Clark postulated that government regulation of ISPs, looking at their traffic and seeing, bad traffic, that sort of thing, was necessary to improve security. Do you think this is a role the government should play, or should it just be market-driven?
My ISP has a hard time just keeping my connection. I don't want them filtering anything. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I didn't hear the speech. I think the market tends to be more effective than the government side. And I think the drivers for many of us who've been in the industry, interesting enough, right, we talked earlier about all of the acronyms that are driving purchasing of different security products out there. But I think the degree to which government gets involved in driving big, broad regulations, particularly around the internet, I think it's harder for them to do it.
And I think in some cases it would be useful for the market to do it. In many cases, I think if you look at any feature, particularly security functionality, most of it starts in the applications and sync down to the silicon and then eventually into the network. This whole concept of clean pipes is really interesting, right, if they can do it, but they can't do it in many cases, and then they also make mistakes, as Josh talked about. I don't know how many emails that are legitimate emails have gotten stopped by my ISP, so there's a quality of service issue here. So I think it's always going to be some sort of partnership, if you will, to some extent. There is no silver bullet, whether it's a government or private. I think it's got to be a combination of both.
Okay, anyone else have one last question? Or we'll let these guys go. Thank you, all three of you, for coming today and being part of this and answering our questions.
Thank you.